Okay, well, welcome everybody to our winter reception. Usually we do music, but this year we had the wonderful opportunity to have Ambassador Kunin come and join us and talk about whatever you two are going to talk about. And when I saw her book and thought about it, I thought that we could find nobody better than Frank Wolf, Dean Emeritus of the School for Professional Studies and a mainstay in EPIC, and especially getting anything done. He's the most getting done person I know. I thought there would be nobody better to do this interview. So I promised I would not speak over 1 minute. He's got this big clock here, which you can't see. So I'm going to turn it over to you to do the introductions. And thank you very much for doing this.
Well,
Let me just say that afterward.
You see what I mean?
Yeah. Right after, we're going to have a buffet and with wine and drinks, and just wine. And there's also Ambassador Kunin's book for sale. It'll be for a book signing. So don't go away. Come and eat after we're done here. Thank you.
Well, we are very lucky to have Ambassador Kunin here. I'm told that the title of ambassador is slightly higher than the title of governor in whatever world of status rules such matters. So I'll call you ambassador, but I think of you as Governor Kunin. In the course of our conversation, I hope your career will become clearer to our audience. But let me just say that in addition to having been ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, governor of Vermont for 3 terms, lieutenant governor, member of the lower house of the Vermont legislature. I don't think, and of course, deputy secretary of education in Washington. Those were your major offices. But I want to start by asking you one last thought. Jean said we usually have music. This time we're going to be luckier. We have poetry. Because what you may not know is that Governor Kunin is a poet, and I'm going to hope that she will agree to read a couple of her poems in the course of our conversation. But I want to start, since we're at Columbia, and since you are yourself a Columbia Journalism School graduate, I thought I'd ask you first, I read in your book that your mother and your brother persuaded you to take an offer of admission at Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism, but you had a scholarship you could take anywhere. You wanted to go to LSE in London, but they persuaded you not to. Do you think they gave you bad advice? And what do you remember of your time as a graduate student at the journalism school?
Well, it was one of those turning points. I sometimes look back and say, well, what if I did go to the London School of Economics? What would have happened to my life? And, once there's a fork in the road, once you take it, that is usually it. So my time at Columbia was a very happy time. It was a much simpler institution at that point. There were very few women. I think there were 60 students and about 12 women. Now that's turned upside down, and there are more women than men, something I wouldn't have dreamt of at that time. And we were actual reporters. We went to news events and put together a newspaper. Television seemed far off. It might as well have been on another planet. We just weren't. We weren't futurists, and of course now that world has entirely changed. So, yeah, sometimes I think if I'd gone to London, but I can't dwell on it.
Okay. I have one other Columbia question. In preparing for today, I've read 3 of the 5 books you've published. I learned a 6th book of poetry is in process at the moment. And in your New Feminist Agenda book, you thank former Professor Carolyn Heilbrunn of Columbia for her reading of it, her inspiration, a number of us here in the room, of course, knew her. I'm curious as to how you and she connected.
Well, we connected when I think I read one of her books, and I wrote to her, and we saw each other, and it was a great connection. I was a big admirer of hers, and she expressed what I felt in terms of the women's movement and women's progress, and we just had a great time talking together. And I forget now, the woman who wrote about Australia was her partner in giving lectures. I think I was at Harvard at the time when I first heard her, and so I'm very grateful to her, and I was sorry that she had to pass away.
Okay. I want to, by the way, share my total enthusiasm about the book that we are pushing here today, and tell everyone that they really should buy it. I'm going to give it away as a holiday gift for a couple of my friends. One of the surprising things about your book to me was that each chapter is introduced by a poem, and I had no idea that you were a poet. And you talk in your book as well about when you furnished or refurnished the residence of the ambassador in Bern in Switzerland, that you were very eager to take away the dusty old leather volumes and put volumes there that were of interest to you and that made a point about America, including, you reported, a number of volumes of poetry. So could you talk a little bit about poetry and your life and what it means and how it comes to be that you write poems now?
Well, yes, I'm still trying to figure it out myself, but I felt, in the process of writing poetry, I felt liberated as a politician, as you know, and sometimes when people find out that I was governor and ambassador, they're taken aback and they say, how can a nice woman like you be involved in politics? But obviously in politics, I had to screen out certain things. I had to be careful about the words I used, the positions I took, and to conform to certain expectations. I still felt I was honest, just to reassure you, but I was more careful. So in a way, coming of age, reaching my 70s, I felt liberated. I felt I didn't have to dress in a certain way, I didn't have to speak in a certain way, and it's as if I opened a new door, and my thinking actually changed, and poetry seemed the natural medium to express myself. And I always liked poetry. I wrote poems sporadically, like for somebody's birthday or my husband's anniversary, or but it was a one-time effort, and I just opened up in a way that was new to me and seemed appropriate. So, as Frank just said, I'm publishing a book of my poetry in April, and it's been fun. It's been, I mean, certain things you can say in a poem which you can't say in prose. And this is a very personal book. I was a little anxious before it was published about a year ago. Was I saying too much? Was I revealing too much of my inner thoughts? And maybe that's still true, but it's what attracts people to the book, and people connect to it in a way that they wouldn't. It's not a political book, at least not in my opinion. My other books have been encouraging women to run for office, telling my story, and hoping that my story will become someone else's story. And of course, we're living through a time now when there's a great boom in women running for office. It's very exciting all by itself. We could talk about that more later, but a friend of mine who's a poet read the book and said, "You're a poet." And I said, "I am." I didn't quite count the poems in the book as benighting me as a poet. So now I am. And still a politician, but not in office. But obviously you can't help but be concerned about politics in the times we live in.
I wonder if you'd be willing to read the poem that I like the best, though I have
Okay.
several favorites. No longer. I brought a copy along in case you need it.
Well, thank you. This is called No Longer. No longer will we make love before breakfast. No longer will I dream of seeing New Zealand or the Cape of Good Hope or bears in the wild. No longer will I say yes more than no. No longer will danger sparkle and safety look dull. No longer will I look at my body without comparison between who I was and who I have become, blaming the light for the difference. No longer can I toss my hair over my face and count 100 strokes. No longer can I do without night cream and day cream, slathering on ounce after ounce. No longer can I be comfortable sitting in my chair reading for hours without getting up to stretch my arms and legs. No longer can I walk without looking down at my feet to avoid mean cracks and malicious bumps. No longer can I skip downstairs like a girl flying without feeling a thing. No longer can I approach the precipice without swaying against my will. No longer do I think ahead of where I will be in 10 years or 20 or more. Now I think in ones or twos or threes, long enough to still hunger for the food of life. No longer do I wish for the next day or the next year to come quickly like I did the year I turned 10. I want the days to saunter like a leisurely museum stroller who stops now and then to gaze and get closer to the canvas to see the brushstrokes, and then steps back for the long view before moving on.
Thank you. Now let's turn, if we can, to your advocacy for women and feminism, which has been one of the continuing themes of your public life. You wrote in Living a Political Life, quote, "My womanhood and its relationship to my capacity to govern were the central issues of my political life, but I had kept them hidden, sometimes even from myself, and more frequently from public view. In order to govern, I had to behave as if being a woman was not an issue, because otherwise the, quote, woman thing, unquote, would take on monstrous proportions and devour whatever else I hoped to accomplish." Is this any less true today than it was in your time as an elective politician? How does that affect how women present themselves, and doesn't it undermine their authenticity in a way which defeats them?
Well, it's interesting to be reminded of what you wrote. But I think yes and no. I think it has changed. Later in that book or another book, I accept my feminism as a driving force, but you still have to be somewhat careful about how strong you come out as a feminist. Not completely. I mean, feminism gave me my passion. When I'm asked why I ran for office in the first place, it was both the environment, which was a big issue in Vermont and is now a big issue nationally in the form of climate change, but also the feminist movement. And the feminist movement really told me I could do it. People like Gloria Steinem and others encouraged us to do what, there's a line in the book that women now are living the lives of the men they had once thought to marry. And I confess I had thought to marry a politician. Luckily, I didn't do that. But it's there, but because there's so many more women now in leadership positions, not only in politics, but in business and government and the arts, there isn't the same laser kind of focus on the female part. We've gotten more accustomed. But yet, it's still there. And I hear the question, which you probably hear too, can we elect a woman president? And the very fact that we're asking that question tells you it's not neutral territory. And there's still firsts. First female conductors, first Nobel Prize winners. So it's still an issue out there, but I don't think it's necessarily negative. That's the good news. It depends on the situation, but sometimes it's refreshing to see a new face, a new gender, and I think it was apparent in the 2018 election when there were a record number of women elected and people actually wanted to vote for a woman. They thought the contrast might be more honest, more refreshing, more creative. But as long as we ask the question, can there be a woman president, we still have a ways to go.
Thank you. One of the passages in your book that gave me the biggest kick was, people may not know, you were married and have children with a doctor. You have, I think, 4 children, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And then in midlife, you and he divorced, and you had a period in your 60s when you were single. And toward the end of the 60s, beginning of your 70s, you began to think about wanting another partner in life. And you write that you looked at the personal ads that people are putting online and imagined writing former governor of Vermont looking for, and decided that wasn't the way to go. So talk a little bit, if you would, and you do very explicitly in your book, about love in later life and John and how you met and all of that.
Well, yes, I couldn't do social media or advertise who I was in search of a spouse. That just didn't work. But I had a second marriage. My husband died almost 2 years ago, and I was very happy. We were very happy. And we met through academia. He was at Dartmouth, and I had done some teaching at Dartmouth. And there were only 2 top criteria I had, and that was one, and he met those. One, that he was a Democrat, and 2, that he was a feminist. And he really was a feminist and supported me in every way. My first husband helped me win elections and was supportive too, but John had it in his DNA. He proved that to me when he said he believed that God was a woman. And so we always said she instead of he. But yeah, we had a lot of things in common. He was a special kind of person, and I write about him. He inspired me to write, and he really gave me somehow the strength to be more revealing. I wrote 2 books when we were married. He read this book before it was published, and he was brave enough to let me write about him. It it's personal. I talk about love and loss, which are two big topics. But thank you for asking.
Well, now I'd like to ask you to read I Loved You When You Did the Dishes.
Okay. Right. I loved you when you did the dishes. I cooked. Let me just take a sip of water.
Sorry if I'm working you too hard.
Not at all. You don't know how the ego is satisfied. I loved you when you did the dishes. I cooked and you did the dishes. Did I love you for that? I listened to the distant clattering in the kitchen while I sat in my chair reading the newspaper. We shared most tasks then, but you did the driving and I could sit still by your side with only a rare glance in the rearview mirror to check if it was safe to pass. Now I do everything, cook and wash the pots and meet the dishwasher's greedy demands. I make the bed which you once made when we slept together. I push your wheelchair and straighten my back, not letting it sink into a stoop before its time. I feel my muscles tighten up the incline. I wish you could feel it too, from your glued position. You need me now to move in any direction, up and down and around corners, without bumping into things like winter boots thrown casually on the floor. I take the lead, pulling you out of yourself and into the world I inhabit. You visit me from time to time, like you used to do when you did the dishes and the counters always needed wiping. This evening is better than this morning when you berated yourself for growing old. What can I do, you asked, pleading with yourself. I whispered, nothing. Evenings we meet on the sofa and talk about a story in the New York Times or a scene from the evening news. We are same-minded again. The world is spinning crazily out of its orbit. We shake our heads from side to side in rhythmic disbelief. I reach for your still hand, cover it with mine, and keep it there.
Now I'd like to do a total change of pace. One of your many public positions was that of ambassador to Switzerland. And you write in your book about your time there, and especially your involvement in the issue of trying to assist the descendants of Jews who perished during the Holocaust, whose numbered accounts had to be matched with their survivors. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that, and also about how that affected, if at all, your own sense of Jewish identity.
I got this, yeah. Well, that's a good question. And I was reminded in today's New York Times, there's a obituary of Paul Volcker, and Volcker actually played a role in retrieving Jewish assets after World War II. He chaired a commission, and he was very fair-minded and worked hard at it. The issue was on my desk almost every day that I was ambassador, with one or two new nuances. And I didn't know that when I, excuse me, I had dinner last night with a cousin who was mostly deaf, so my throat is, anyway, it preoccupied me, and what the whole goal was to return the assets that Jews had deposited in Swiss banks because of the numbered accounts and because of the secrecy. And it was punishable by death in Germany to take money out. So they had go-betweens, people who deposited the money. And after the war, those who survived and those who were heirs wanted to claim their rightful savings. And the Swiss put up a lot of barriers. They were very bureaucratic-minded. One of the more unbelievable questions they asked was for death certificates from people who died in the Holocaust. So I was born in Switzerland. I came to this country when I was almost 7, and my mother instilled in me and my brother the love of country, and we felt some special patriotism towards Switzerland. But at this point, I saw, well, I guess, a dark side. Not that everyone was like that, but the Swiss basically stonewalled the search. And when it became obvious that American foreign policy and World Jewish Congress and others put a lot of pressure on Switzerland to come out with a more open, transparent process, they finally did. They published lists of what they called dormant accounts. And one of the surprises was I discovered my mother's name in that list. So then I was asked, can I be impartial since I'm in the script? And I said, of course I can be. I've been governor, I know how to be fair-minded, even-handed. But of course it did affect me in a way I couldn't talk about very openly, because I felt, you know, somebody would ask me, were you appointed by Clinton because you were Jewish? And I said, I don't think Clinton even knows I'm Jewish. So that wasn't the reason. But by the time I left, I felt maybe that was a mission. Not solely, not exclusively, of course, but that I was there at the right time. And it took a long time, but there was an agreement with a judge in New York for, I think it was 3.1 billion, a certain amount of money to be returned. It took a long time, and it didn't cover everyone, but because the Swiss banks kept great records, which the Swiss are prone to do, it solved maybe 3/4 of the problem. So I discovered a subtle kind of anti-Semitism. You know, there's a story where two conductors are talking about their violinists, and the Swiss conductor says, well, we've got 8 Jewish violinists in our orchestra. And the American conductor said, I don't know how many violinists are Jewish in my orchestra. So there was more of an identity attachment than there would be in the United States. But I also made great friends in Switzerland. I spoke to a youth group who decided to take on this issue. So it wasn't all negative, but it took a long time. There was a thorough report. I went to a parliamentary hearing on the subject. It was me and the Israeli ambassador sitting in the balcony, and that made front page news that we were there. So it was a new experience, but I think it turned out well, and I was glad I had been there at that time. I was never identified as being Jewish in the press in the United States, that I was in Switzerland. And it just, I sort of know what integration means in the United States, and I'm very grateful for that.
All right, if it's okay with you, we'll go on for another 15 minutes or so
Sure.
with my asking you questions, and then we'll let the audience ask some questions, because I'm sure I'm not asking the questions you would like me to ask. Can we come back to private life again? You and your husband moved into the senior community in Vermont, where you currently live and where he died. And a number of us here are contemplating that step now or in the near future, some of us putting it off as long as possible, putting our heads in the sand. You've done it. You've downsized. You talk about some of the discomfort and pain of that. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that.
Well, I'm happy we did it. It depends on the facility, of course, and the location and your family situation. So it's hard to say across the board. My husband was the decider, and now I'm grateful to him, because I'm in a community called Wake Robin, and it's just outside of Burlington, Vermont. And it's a community, and it's on the whole good. You know, you have to get used to collegial life. The only thing everybody tells me, and I tell you now, is don't wait till you're really frail and can't actually enjoy where you live. Downsizing is very hard. Everybody who lives there has had a big house or an apartment that they love and has moved into a much smaller space. But we're just looking for a new CEO at Wake Robin, and they're, much to my surprise and everybody's surprise, there are 3 excellent candidates. So people still want to do this type of work. So I think it depends on the economics. It depends on your feeling of independence, your attachment to your home. But if it suits you, it's a good way to enjoy life. I have a lot of friends there, but I also have friends outside Wake Robin. So I'm still involved in women in politics and the arts and other things. So it's not my whole life. And I'm lucky enough to come to New York and speak to you.
Your maiden speech in the Vermont House of Representatives in 1973 was a speech in support of the Equal Rights Amendment. Here we are in 2018. Do you think that effort will ever bear fruit?
Well, we're 19, just to catch you up.
Thank you.
But, well, I've seen some little flurries of activity for the Equal Rights Amendment, and there's some who think we might do it this time. We'd have to get some amendment or something to negate the time stricture, because we were given a certain number of years, and then it died. It's always been hard to make a strong case for it, because we have so many other laws now and court cases that define equality, gender equality. But it would still be nice to have that permanent hook in the Constitution for future cases and future laws. So it might be revived, and that would be great, especially with the energy from some of the younger women now who are really focused on gender equality, are politically active, are not accepting the status quo.
You lost your father at an age when you you were so long, 2.5 or so, that you have no memory of him. Your older brother Edgar, according to your book, played an outsized role in your life, in part as a result of that. You lost Edgar a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken. He was, like you, in Vermont politics, and I think head of the Appropriations Committee while you were the governor. Um, how did that all work out?
Well, most of the time, great, because we really were on the same page in terms of our values and our priorities, and we were very close. But when we differed, there was a spotlight put on it, and my older brother was a strong personality. He also won, at a young age, a Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. But it disturbed him. We vote by alphabet, and he was Edgar and I'm Madeleine Kunin, and K comes before M. And somebody said to him, "Hey, you're voting with your sister again." Well, he didn't really like that comment. So he decided to ask the clerk to call the roll backwards. Nobody knew what to do. They didn't know when their turn came. They were so used to the usual alphabetical order. He only did it once. But we were pals, but we also had a few differences which became glaring and involved a lot of discussion at the dinner table.
Your current activity among the many that you're engaged in is with an organization you actually founded called Emerge Vermont. I know you would hit me over the head if I didn't ask you about that.
Not quite.
Not quite, but anyway, we'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Well, Emerge Vermont started in California, and the purpose of it is to recruit and train Democratic women to run for office. And I was invited to be a speaker in California at their fundraiser and in Boston. And I thought, well, why not Vermont? So we founded a Vermont Emerge. And it's not a fundraising organization like Emily's List. What we do is train women to do fundraising and to do public speaking. And we had our best year in 2018. I hate to say this, but thanks to Donald Trump, who really inspired and motivated people. I got to do something, is what so many felt. And I'm no longer the chair. The present chair is terrific and doing a great job. And some evidence of that is that in 2018, 80% of those who went through the program and ran for office got elected. So, you may ask, why do we still need this? I mean, can't we do it on our own? And yet, we still do. And I've concluded that women are so used to being credentialed, having a degree, having a certificate, to prove who they are and that they're capable of taking the job. And we still need that, saying you can do it. There's no degree in running for office. And it's a wide spectrum of what you need to do to get there. So Emerge gives them that confidence, most of all, that they are entitled to run and capable of being elected. So there never will be an Emerge for men. They emerge when they sit in a boardroom and see the portraits on the walls.
I wonder if we can conclude this part of the program by asking you to read one last poem, and then we'd open it up to questions. Is that all right?
Yes.
I'd like you to read, if you're willing, a very personal poem, love poem.
Okay. Yeah, my husband became ill, and at Wake Robin, the advantage is that you're all in the same place, even if you need nursing care. You're in the same, it's reachable from those of us who live independently. So I would visit John. This is called the love poem. Each night I wheel you to your door with a kiss on your lips. I smile my love at you, generously I think. You don't know how much I love you, you say. I do, I do. We formed a ritual of waving goodbye as I retreat slowly down the hall. At first, I wave with one hand in the air, and then my arms go wild before I turn the corner, as if struck by a storm or signaling for help. We wave in tandem. You are there and I am here. The nurses now know we wave not for them, but for one another, to have and to hold the love we swore to once and forever.
Thank you very much. All right, I think we have 15 or 20 minutes by mutual agreement for questions. 15. All right, Diana, are you going to take the mic around? And if you can't hear the question, I'll be glad to repeat it.
Okay.
Or if others can't.
So, is the mic on?
Yes.
With respect to the Equal Rights Amendment, when it's redone today, will it be limited to women, or do you think it should include all issues of gender orientation and the like?
Well, I think the Constitution, as you know, originally left out women and African Americans. So men's rights are guaranteed in the Constitution, at least spoken about. It's the assumption it applied to men. And women were included with the passage of the 19th Amendment, giving us the right to vote. But otherwise, there's a feeling that there's a need to be explicit so that it covers a wider area of law.
Yes.
When you entered,
Wait a minute.
when you entered politics, was there a specific one reason why you did it?
Well, as I alluded to in passing, the Equal Rights Amendment was a major reason, and I had lobbied for the Equal Rights Amendment before I ran, and I also spoke against Justice Clarence Thomas, in Washington when that hearing was going on, chaired by Biden. And I had a kind of internal fury, both that and in the legislature in Vermont for the Equal Rights Amendment. Why should all these men decide our future? So I felt the importance of being at the table, just being at the table and having a voice. And then the environment was the second reason. Vermont is a strongly environmental state. We didn't talk about climate change yet. About 5 years later, we did. And Vermont had passed a law called Act 250, which set criteria for large-scale development, clean water, traffic, all of that. And it was passed the year before I ran, and there was an effort to repeal it. So I wanted to be there to protect Act 250. And then there was something in me. I don't know what makes you make that leap from private life to public life. But I just felt I could do it, which is probably pretty audacious.
Yes.
When you were
Wait a second.
active in politics and being an ambassador at the time, you were though, and compare it to current day political activity with respect to truth-telling. there's an article in today's Times next to the article that you quoted, or that indicates, though, that the idea of truth and truth-telling, though, seems to have been lost. Is this a new phenomenon, or has this been the case for a while, and that we haven't really been perceptive enough to pick it up?
Are you referring to ambassadors who get appointed because of their financial contributions and the career ambassadors? Is that the difference? I mean, there always have been ambassadors who were very prominent but had no diplomatic experience. And there are two kinds of ambassadors now. I was a political appointee, but not because of my wealth, I can assure you. But I did know, I was in the Clinton administration, and I had worked with Bill Clinton at governors' meetings and associations, so he knew who I was. And I was first, before I was ambassador, I was Deputy Secretary of Education. And then when an opening came up, I became ambassador to Switzerland. I'm not sure that, so I think the system is tilted now.
Madeleine, I think his question really was focused more, if I understood it correctly, on people who are willing to tell the truth at personal expense now,
Oh, I'm
as
sorry.
compared to some other time in the past. Truth-telling.
That's a big question. I'm afraid the definition of truth-telling has become smudged. It's not in clear print. And I don't know what it's going to do to us, especially the younger generation, when we hear that a certain event is, well, the impeachment is called a hoax. And there are very few media now that really are more objective. Nobody is entirely objective. So I think it's up to us to try to decipher who's lying and who's telling the truth. And I guess look to various sources for news. But it's a trying time. My local newspaper now in Vermont, I came to Vermont to actually be a reporter, and it was a newspaper. Now it's a very thin magazine with no coverage of the legislature or national news, and that's happened around the country. We just need people who will stand up for the truth, and even at their personal risk. We have to support those people who do, and not punish, and drown out those who will punish them for standing up.
I hope everyone will join me in thanking you for a wonderful,
Thank you.
and a wonderful book. It's available in the back. Turn it over to Jean here.